For the past month or so, I've been working with a wonderful group of folks in our fourth Bridge Builders group. And for those who don't know what Bridge Builders is, it's a ministry that brings together 5 people for the purpose of helping them grow in their ability to use their biography or personal story to build bridges of empathy and understanding with those who are different from themselves. Now, during each of the first 6 sessions, one of the members gets a full 30 minutes to share their story with the group using a template that's been provided. This means that each presentation ends with the same question, which just so happens to be my very favorite. And the question is as follows. If you could travel back in time and speak with your 18-year-old self, what piece of advice would you give that 18-year-old? That question is a great opportunity to move beyond the simple facts of what has happened to them during the course of their lifetime. And it gives us a glimpse of how they might use the wisdom gleaned from that lifetime of experience to save themselves a little hardship. Well, I thought about that question a lot this past week because, as luck would have it, the assigned gospel reading for the day had a lot to do with the piece of advice that I would give the 18-year-old version of myself. What's that piece of advice? Well, first listen as I read this week's passage, and then we'll come back together and explore a dimension of the text that could save us a lot of frustration moving forward. So here now, Mark chapter 10, verses 46 through 52 is read from the Common English Bible. Jesus and his followers came into Jericho. Now, as Jesus was leaving Jericho, together with his disciples and a sizable crowd, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, Timaeus' son, was sitting beside the road. And when he heard that Jesus of Nazareth was there, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, show me mercy." Many scolded him, telling him to be quiet, but he shouted even louder, "Son of David, show me mercy." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him forward." They called the blind man. "Be encouraged. Get up. He's calling you." Throwing his coat to the side, he jumped up and came to Jesus. And Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said, "Teacher, I want to see." Jesus said, "Go, your faith has healed you." At once he was able to see, and he began to follow Jesus on the way. And there ends today's sacred reading. So, now that you've heard the reading, you might be wondering what that piece of advice buried within today's reading that I would give my 18-year-old self. Well, here it is. Give people, including yourself, the time and space they need to understand and process whatever it is. Now, let me point you to a couple pieces of the story that makes this powerful point. And then let's talk about how that piece of wisdom might change our lives in powerful ways. There were at least 2 junctures in the story where Jesus could have handled things much differently than he did. The first of those 2 involves his interaction with the crowd. As Jesus continued his journey from Galilee to Jerusalem, today's reading told us that Jesus encountered a boisterous crowd on the outskirts of Jericho. And within that crowd, there was a single voice who knew exactly what he wanted: mercy. And how did the crowd react? Well, crowds rarely react well to a single clarion voice that has the self-awareness and courage to ask for what is needed. Crowds tend to be driven by groupthink and see that kind of self-awareness as a threat. And because of that, the crowd did that day what crowds often do. It tried to silence and distance Bartimaeus. And here's where Jesus was faced with the first of two critical choices about how he could respond. For you see, Jesus could have spent all his time and energy that day rebuking the crowd, trying to convince them that they were wrong. But he didn't. No. Instead, Jesus allowed the crowd to be exactly where they were in their process of understanding. But even more powerful, Jesus extended that same courtesy to himself. That's why instead of arguing with them, Jesus said simply, "Call him forward." It was that simple balance that Jesus struck. A balance between allowing the crowd to be themselves and allowing him to be who he was as well, that moved the story forward. And that takes us to our second point in this morning's story, where Jesus faced yet another critical juncture. And that happened in verse 51, after Bartimaeus threw his coat aside, jumped up, and made his way to Jesus. For when he finally arrived in front of Jesus, Jesus must have understood what Bartimaeus' most pressing challenge in life was, his lack of eyesight, right? And yet, Jesus did not make any assumptions about what Bartimaeus needed. Instead, he remained open to the possibility that perhaps Bartimaeus faced even greater challenges that were not perhaps visible to the naked eye. He might, for instance, have had a troubled marriage or been overcome with worry about the well-being of a loved one. And Jesus' sensitivity didn't stop there. For even if lack of eyesight was Bartimaeus' greatest challenge, Jesus still didn't know if Bartimaeus was ready to be given the ability to see. For like many of us, Bartimaeus might have derived so much of his sense of identity from his plight that he might not yet have been ready to let go of that identity or way of relating to the world. So, instead of projecting his interpretations of, or even his assumptions about the situation, Jesus did one of the most amazing things. He created safe space for Bartimaeus himself to name his own need. When Jesus asks simply, "What do you want me to do for you?" And then Jesus shut up and listened. Every time I hear this healing story, I'm bowled over by those two pieces of the story. By the way in which Jesus gave the crowd the time and space they needed so they could become ready for what lay ahead, and by the ways in which Jesus' own sense of self was so strong that it gave him the ability to allow others to find their own sense of self as well. You know, the need for those kind of qualities stand out more than ever these days. For let's face it, we live in a time where few extend such goodness and grace to others. If you sign under your social media account in a place like Facebook, for instance, immediately you'll see dozens of examples of those attacking or shaming those who they feel don't get it, whatever the particular it might be in that thread. Or if you flip on the television or even watch a broadcast on your smartphone, you'll see panelists on talk shows calling those with whom they disagree idiots or morons or even worse. The ability to hold time and space for those who are not yet ready for the next stage in their development has completely disappeared these days, it seems. Because of it, many of us pay the price. I was reminded of that fact this week as I taped an episode of the series Conversations That Matter that will drop on our church's YouTube channel this week. I was talking with a member of our faith community, a woman named Tanya Cooper, who is an attorney that specializes in cases of domestic violence and sex trafficking. We were talking because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and that made the conversation so timely. So in the course of our conversation, Tanya and I talked a little bit about what to do if we think a loved one might be involved in a domestic violence situation. Now, many of us found ourselves in that circumstance, concerned for a loved one, our first instinct might be to do the very opposite of what Jesus did in this morning's story. Our instinct would be to jump in, take control, and start directing the other as to what they should do. We might bark out commands like, "You've got to get out of there now," or even enact plans of our own creation by saying, "I'll be there Monday at 9 a.m. with the U-Haul truck. Make sure your bags are packed so I can get you out of there." And while our intentions might be good, the part we forget about is that in responding in such ways, we are perpetuating that pattern that their abusers have established. And by that, I mean we are yet another person who come into their lives and take away their agency or their ability to have a say in their own life. And because of that, our attempts might end up backfiring and drive the abused back to the abuser. But if we remember the wisdom of Jesus' approach in today's story, we could affect healing on a deeper level than we ever dreamed. One that is about far more than just having them physically leave the presence of their abuser. If we ask a variation of Jesus' question in that circumstance, something as simple as, "How can I be of support?" Or if we extend and open it off, something along the lines of, "Gosh, I love you so much and I'm concerned about you, and I want you to know that I will be there for you if you ever need my support in the days ahead." If you say things like that, then you too will find yourself in a place of humility, much like Jesus did. You won't, in other words, be patting yourself on the back thinking, "Gosh, I just saved or healed someone." No, instead you will utter a simple phrase like the one Jesus uttered. "Your faith has healed you." Your faith in God, and even your faith in self. And the best part is the wisdom of Jesus' approach doesn't just work in cases of domestic violence. Friends, it works in all of those moments in life when we face challenges and trials in the presence of others. For by letting go of our need to control and manipulate others, and let them and us be what and who we are in that moment, then our chances for healing will increase exponentially. And so as we go forth to face the challenges before us this week and beyond, I pray that we will hold on to the wisdom and the grace found in Jesus. And in doing so, we too may be healed and made whole in ways that are greater than we can ever dream. May it be so. Amen.